Welcome to Inside Scoop Live, the podcast where indie authors get personal, sharing insights about their books, their writing journeys, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt, and I invite you to join me for engaging conversations with both debut indie authors and seasoned veterans. Whether you're looking for your next great read or a bit of inspiration, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Richard Becker is joining us today to talk about his latest book, Born on Monday. It follows a woman as she heads back to her hometown in Maine to help her mom and get away from a dangerous ex, only to find herself pulled right back into old relationships, tough history, and serious suspense. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Richard R. Becker is an award-winning American author whose gripping stories blend resilience and moral complexity. His new novel, Born on Monday, promises a thrilling tale of small-town sins that will captivate readers. His debut novel, Third Wheel, published in 2023, soared into Amazon's top 100 thriller and suspense literary fiction novels. It also earned a Kirkus Reviews feature and won 7 awards, including Literary Thriller of the Year by the Artisan International Book Excellence Awards. His collection, 50 States, published in 2021, crafted from a challenge to write one story a week for 50 weeks, topped Amazon's literary short story charts and also won multiple honors. Raised in Milwaukee, Richard overcame poverty and personal challenges, infusing these experiences into his work to add emotional depth. When he's not writing, he enjoys acting, hiking, photography, and time with his family. He is married and has 2 adult children. And you can learn more about Richard Becker and his work at byrichardarbecker.com. Hi, Rich. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Hi, Sherry. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, and it's nice to finally meet you. We've worked with you on a couple of your books at Reader Views, so it's nice to get the chance to talk to you.
Oh, well, thanks a lot. Yeah, this is my first interview with you guys, so I was kind of looking forward to it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Why don't you get us started by telling us a little bit about your latest book, Born on Monday? What's it about, and what was your inspiration behind the story?
Yeah, so Born on Monday is a story of the strange friends who are brought back together to this small town of Augusta, Maine, which is actually the capital of Maine. And there they're going to have to face some of their past sins, some present day threats, and a historic Nor'easter. So the original inspiration for this story actually came from a short story called Time Capsule that was in my debut collection called 50 States. And that was about people who move away after high school and how they're changed. But sometimes the people who stay in the small towns or any town, they don't change as much. And so when they're brought back together, there's a little bit of a contrast of who they've become or who they haven't become. And in this case, I think there's some added tension because I decided to have one of them sort of bring back something dark with them from where they were, actually a couple. And because of that, that kind of creates this tension and this threat that carries out throughout the story. It makes it a thriller as opposed to just a literary fiction.
Yeah, wow. You mentioned the story was set in Augusta, Maine. Why was this the right setting for your story? And I know there's a storm coming, so how does that approaching nor'easter shape the tension and the timing of the events?
Yeah, so like I said, the original short story, because it came from my anthology, which was 50 states, and in that I had one story for each state. And this short story called Time Capsule was just set in Augusta. But I was kind of like thrilled to kind of go back and use a fictionalized version of it because there's a lot that's definitely fictionalized, like certain things don't exist that are in the book. And there's a few things that are, so people from Augusta will recognize them.
Yeah.
But I think the town to me kind of represents many that I've known in like New England and Midwest. It's sort of like this smaller state capital compared to all these larger metropolitan areas. And I even have that here in Nevada where, I've lived in Las Vegas and Reno, but if you go to Carson City, which is our state's capital, it's this smaller, more insulated town that survives as a state capital. And I think that's great because they tend to have these rich and storied pasts, but at the same time, like time sort of stands still for them. And it just kind of punctuates that overall. In terms of the approaching storm, I think it just kind of fits in the setting of the events for the town itself. Like there's a storm coming and they're all concerned about the storm, but yet it's something very familiar to them. It's something that happens to them on a semi-regular basis. So they know many of the services won't be available and that people have to rely on each other within their neighborhood.
Yeah, wow. I'm intrigued by your short stories about the 50 states. That's awesome. Do you have knowledge of all 50 states that you could write such stories?
I've been to about 35. I haven't really been to Maine. I wanted to get to Maine and I just wasn't able to for several reasons. And I'm going to go to Maine hopefully next year. So maybe I can set some book signings all the way up into Augusta. It'd be, kind of remarkable if I can do sort of a book tour in New England.
Yeah.
But I've been to about 35, and then for those I wasn't able to get to those states, I used some regional references. I am pretty traveled in New England area, and that kind of informed my experience in terms of how people act. I know Maine might be a little bit different, so I don't want anybody to get mad at me for saying that. But I mean, there is sort of a regional feel to New England, and I think I captured that pretty well. In fact, I'm married to somebody from New England, so it kind of helps.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, I was just curious. I didn't mean to get off
Yeah.
topic, but I was,
No, that's
yeah. So
fine.
go out and buy 50 states, listeners.
Yeah, as well. I won't argue with that. And actually, since you say that real quick, I might as well throw in that there's other references in Born on Monday that are directly tied to one in particular that's directly tied to 50 states. So if you read like the New Hampshire story in 50 states, it'll automatically feel familiar because the location is mentioned numerous times in Born on Monday.
Oh, okay. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about a couple of your characters. Jessica, she's a survivor of domestic abuse. She's returned home to Maine to care for her mother, and she's trying to rebuild her life, and she faces shadows of her past. What do you want readers to understand about her at the very beginning?
Well, I'm probably going to see that she's kind of very intelligent and self-reliant, even though it kind of comes across sometimes as arrogance, and I think they'll feel that. So some people are kind of put off by Jessica, like beta readers who've even mentioned, like some of them kind of like Jessica and some of them don't like Jessica, and that's perfectly fine because a lot of my characters are sort of morally ambiguous. I consider that just part of real life. But however, I think her strong traits, and I think this is really important to kind of take away, is that her strong traits, these strong ones, didn't save her from becoming a victim of domestic abuse. And
Mm,
in some ways, her strengths actually compound the trauma because it forces her to be silenced by the shame of it. So it's a lot of times people who are strong on their exteriors they don't want to share that they've actually been a victim or they're trying to survive this. So I know not every reader will take to her, but her story arc is very consistent also with some real life stalking stories. Stalking happens to like 4% of women and like 2% of men every year, but only
mm,
about 50% of those are ever reported because it's really hard to prove that you're being stalked. And then fewer still ever result in favorable outcomes for the victims. So hopefully, readers will find a little sympathy for her in that this is a very real situation that people fall into regardless of how strong they are.
yeah, that's a good point. I like that angle too, because, you don't think about, oh, well, she's such a strong woman. Why didn't she stand up for herself? Well, yeah, lots of reasons.
Yeah, in fact, I did a lot of research on this particular topic with stalking and domestic abuse in general. And in fact, even the dedication to the book is dedicated to somebody named Sandy, who actually had some very candid conversations with me beyond my research to share some insight about her stalking experience. And that's why I dedicated to her and also all trauma survivors.
Yeah, wow. I'm sure that brought a lot of authenticity to her character as well. Now, tell us a little bit about Billy Stevens. He becomes Jessica's anchor and her
Mhm.
reminder of everything that she's lost. What makes their relationship such a powerful part of the story?
So I think really from the beginning, and this is something I even liked when it was just a short story, is that although, Jessica breaks up with Billy when they're in high school, once his opportunities to escape with her kind of evaporated, which we can talk about later. But I don't think she really broke up with Billy as much as she broke up with the idea of him and how he related to everything else that she wanted to leave behind in Augusta. So a lot of
Mm,
people who are in small towns, and they don't even have to be that small, when they want to escape to bigger places, they tend to want to like leave everything behind. They don't want to take anything with them. And that's why a lot of relationships, when some people go to college and some people don't, or go to two different colleges, they don't last because they're truly just trying to move on with their lives into the next chapter. And sometimes that means leaving other things behind. So I don't think that's kind of uncommon. In fact, I even felt that a bit. I went to high school in Las Vegas, even though I'm originally from the Midwest, and I wanted to go to Los Angeles, to go to school, and I never intended to come back to Las Vegas. It was just by chance. And
yeah.
but that's what you do is you just sort of like leave and you don't have any intention of ever returning. But I think later there comes this part of the story where Jessica starts to wonder because she's wrong about a lot of things. And I think because of that, she starts to say, maybe I was wrong about Billy too. Maybe I kind of did him wrong.
Another set of characters, Andrea and Dustin, they kind of push the story in opposite directions. One searching for truth, the other's trying to bury it. How did their choices influence the path that Jessica and Billy take?
I'm so glad you brought this up because I always kind of felt like this contrast kind of exists. So just like with Jessica and Billy, okay, they have opposing story arcs in that Billy's story is really about an expansion and Jessica's is almost about a contraction.
Mm,
And here we have this sort of same kind of theme happening again with Andrea and Dustin in that Andrea is motivated by her and what the truth promises. So that's what she's trying to do as a reporter is get to the truth. But Dustin is actually motivated by deception and what it promises because that's where he draws his power from. What he's able to do that people don't see is where he finds his strength and opportunities. So as the story progresses, we see that Andrea's truth like empowers Billy as sort of an inspiration, but Dustin's truth becomes like a hard lesson that Jessica has to learn because those are the ones that how they sort of partner up in the story. And I think because of that, both of them serve as guides in a way, just sort of like opposite ends of the spectrum.
right, right. All right, now tell us about Kyle. He's the bad guy. His psychological games kind of center on a haunting nursery rhyme called Solomon
Mhm.
Grundy. What is it about this rhyme that resonated with the mood and the message you wanted to convey? Because I love that.
Oh, thanks. The nursery rhyme is something that Kyle Bronte has. He sort of adopted it into his modus operandi. So he sees himself as a Solomon Grundy, but when it comes to the actual story, he detaches the poem from himself as a person, which is about a man who lives an entire life in a week. He's born on Monday, and then we carry on to his death by the end of the week. But he applies this to this familiar pattern that he has with all his ill fated relationships. In his mind, all his relationships start well enough, but he's eventually betrayed and that fuels his need to punish his victims, punish the people who leave him because
Mm,
he's abusive. But for the story, the poem is also a reminder of his methodical cruelty and kind of also at the same time underscores the inevitability of violence. Because
mm.
as the story progresses, we drop in like the next line of the poem at different points, which shows us like, oh, something's going to happen. So like when he's saying, take ill on this day or die on this day, you take it for the value it has.
Yeah, yeah, that's chilling.
Yeah.
That's what you're going for.
Yeah. In a thriller, yeah.
Now, there's an abduction sequence, and it's one of the book's most gripping moments.
Mhm.
What emotions or turning points did you want listeners to experience during this part of the story?
Yeah, without giving too much away, I'll say that the abduction kind of blends this intense feeling of isolation and vulnerability and violation. So even if we see Jessica as this reasonably strong protagonist, her mother's presence during the event actually punctuates her vulnerability. Like Jessica's not just afraid for her life on the line, but she's really afraid of her mother's life and what's on the line. And the severity of the situation is kind of also punctuated by this idea that the intruder isn't the only person doing the violating. The storm itself seems to be encroaching on this idea that their home is safe. And yet, at the same time, the storm is maybe a little bit different, is a necessity to uncovering the truth. But in this particular case, is an intruder is trying to break into their house and in a way that's very intense because it's not just immediate break in and abduction. He actually terrorizes them for a moment before he can take Jessica away.
Oh my gosh. Oh my. I'm laughing because I have so much admiration for psychological thriller writers and the dark side of writing because that's fun. I mean, I'm sure that, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did you have more fun writing the dark sides or hi, everybody, kind of?
So I think there's to a point, like so. There's a little bit of a trade-off in that I try not to go too dark. I think I like to have readers infuse some of their own experiences and thoughts into the story, as opposed to just laying everything bare like some thriller writers do.
Right.
And as a result, what I've noticed is that readers kind of tend to make it worse, even worse than I might have come up with. So I let them have fun too.
Yeah. Yeah. So the confrontation at the lake house, how did you strike a balance between the realism and the intensity in that scene?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about. So, like, I think balancing the realism and the intensity is
Yeah.
something that I try to work throughout the novel, right? Because a lot of the stories we see today, they have they skew toward the shock value. And I think that's good. So, what I do is, in trying to find that middle that I mentioned, is I share a few course details here and there that really kind of get under people's skin. And then that framework is where the reader gets to fill in all the other details and something that's even more powerful and impactful than I could put down on the page. And I think it's effective. And it kind of goes along with, even though this isn't going to be on an audiobook, maybe until the spring. This is something that I've learned actually writing radio commercials,
Mm,
is that you can actually do more with radio commercials. It's one of the most visual mediums because when people hear the story, they kind of insert these pictures into their mind. And that's kind of what I tried to do. And if you go with the show all thing where you show everything, I think sometimes it ends up being a little bit hokey and people kind of go, oh, I don't know. Kind of ruins the mood.
yeah, yeah, don't tell
Yeah.
me. Let me figure it out. Let me
Yeah.
picture it my way. I love to hear that it's gonna be an audiobook. I always say I read for a living, so my fun time is with audiobooks, and it's true. I love to just have people read to me. Are your other books in audio too?
Yes. So I've written, this was my third book, and I wrote one companion. The two books, not the companion, those went to audiobook.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about small town, and the story examines small town and the power, the secrets, the influence. What did you want to reveal about the way communities remember and sometimes rewrite their own history?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most compelling themes is the cost of secrets, both personal and communal. They shape the fabric of many small towns. There's things that everybody knows in a town, but nobody wants to talk about. And I kind of hope readers kind of pull away that there's not only a cost to that, but there's a complexity behind it.
Mm,
And there's something I think the character Andrea, who's a reporter, she must learn that more than anybody else, because sometimes we're forced to make these pragmatic compromises and we're left wondering whether justice should coexist with mercy. I think that's kind of like what I pulled away from this story, especially with her, because, her whole impetus is to find the truth and shame the devil. But she's put in this position toward the end of the story where maybe she can't do that and also protect the people she cares about.
yeah.
This is also what makes it a literary thriller as opposed to just a thriller, is that
Right.
there's a lot of depth and weight with the themes and the characters within the story.
Now, grief runs through the story, especially in the shadow of Autumn's loss. How did that grief guide the emotional direction of the story?
The sacrifice that is made by Autumn is kind of like this pivotal turning point in the story because we're finally forced to come to the terms that the stakes are high and the stakes are real. And I think Billy, really more than anybody, has to face this truth and decide whether he's going to crumble before this new threat in his life and earn redemption for what he
Mm,
perceives as his past sins or not. And we don't know because his physical strength, he might have this physical strength, but he's very much emotionally vulnerable. And that makes for this compelling contrast. So we don't know what he will do. In fact, his first few steps after facing a trauma is to not go the proper direction, but to fall back into what he knows best, which is drinking and kind of burying the past that way.
we all have our own ways of dealing with things we don't run a quite face yet.
Yeah.
Now, Jessica, wow, this girl, she faces like real danger as well as public judgment. What
Mhm.
did you want to say about the impact of online shaming and the way fear spreads in the digital age?
So again, we have this woman who's in her mid 20s. She's a successful account executive in a New York advertising agency, right? She's obviously smart. She's self-aware. She's ambitious, but she's not exempt from becoming this victim of abuse. And it's her challenge to break the cycle of it. But I think the real tell is talking about when it comes to online shaming is that she has to endure. But at the same time, I wanted to punctuate this idea that psychological abuse, which includes online shaming,
Yeah.
can be equally, if not more dramatic than the physical abuse that trauma survivors experience, right? Because while the physical abuse, we can heal from that like in a relatively short period of time, hopefully. Shame is something that's often inescapable. And the shame of it, that's why she doesn't want to tell her mom. She doesn't want to tell anybody around her that this even occurred to her. And ironically, it's the shame that entraps so many people in these cycles of abuse.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure. And then just this whole online community that we have or environment that we have now, it's so good in some ways and then extremely negative in other ways. So,
And,
yeah.
and in Justice Cake's case, too, is that, Kyle had done things that he or puts out that ends up getting exposed to the world
Mm,
uh, that destroys her life like on every single level, right? Like if you take somebody's secret moment, if you will, and share that out to the world, that can destroy them, with their employer, with their credibility, even in a small town or everywhere that they are.
right.
We kind of see that happen. In fact, that's what Kyle does to his previous girlfriend before Jessica, is he destroys her life by sharing compromising video of her.
Mm, nice
Mm.
guy. So there's a police investigation and it builds tension as the truth
Uh,
starts to surface. What did those scenes reveal about the difference between seeking justice and shaping a narrative?
So I really think that the tension from the police really comes from more along the lines of the uncertainty of whether they're protectors or detractors. We don't really know. So, unlike the district attorney who plays a big role in the story, he's a very complicated person. We only see, and I want the readers to know this, is you're only seeing the police really from the point of view of the characters who interact with them.
Mm,
So, for example, what I mean by this, like most of the scenes of the investigating police, we see them with Billy a lot of times. So, we're seeing the police through Billy's lens, and he's somebody who doesn't trust the police because of his own reputation of being a mean drunk in town and somewhat of a troublemaker. This is
mm,
something he's gone around with them multiple times. So, we're not really sure how the police feel or what they're really thinking when it comes to Billy. And we actually do see the same thing with Jessica too, because some of the early decisions she makes in the book, the police have sort of like this. They're a little bit more ambivalent toward her. They don't believe her. They don't trust her either. But that's not necessarily the police as much as maybe Jessica's view of the police when it's her scenes.
right. It's not a procedural. It's what we see through the eyes of the characters. Yeah.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
though it's third person, it kind of tells, like sometimes it's very direct on what they're thinking, but sometimes the police might just be, because of the things that have been exposed to us, we have to follow these steps. And maybe they're just doing their procedure, but in the eyes of somebody like Billy, or in the case of Jessica, they don't feel that way. They feel like maybe the police have it out for them.
Now, the timing of everything, you've got Halloween and the storm and power outages and all of this stuff creating a,
Yeah.
a sense that, you know, it's closing in, fate's closing in. Why was that convergence important to the story's meaning?
Well, what's kind of funny is, I'll go ahead and admit this, is that the storm was honestly a happy accident. I was researching the weather for the time period that the story takes place, and there just happened to be a historic nor'easter that overlapped my story. Um, and it took place in October over Halloween. It was October 2017. It knocked out power for hundreds of thousands of customers in the region,
Oh, wow.
especially in Maine. Yeah. And then in some ways, the storm becomes this like third antagonist, and it's just as threatening as any other threat in the story. And in some ways, empowers the antagonist to take advantage of the storm. But at the same time, we always keep in mind that the storm's fury and everything that's converging around this time also is this catalyst of what it almost has to happen to uncover the truth and all these things that were buried prior to the actual present day story that's taking place. And that's kind of how it all kind of came together. So I did use the storm's energy and fury to also accelerate the power and impact that the antagonists could have against the protagonist characters.
I love that you used natural element to be an antagonist as well.
Yeah.
Now, the story shifts between quiet reflection and then sudden danger. How did you want those contrasts to reflect Jessica's state of mind?
I just want people to know that for trauma survivors, that the struggle is internal as much as it is external. You might know what you should do in these kind of circumstances, but that doesn't always mean you're going to do it. And that's the big impetus. Like, it was very difficult for her to even break away from Kyle to begin with. She was in New York City. And if it wasn't for the fact that he was put in jail and she had to go and bail him out, she would have never found out some of the nasty things he was doing to his former girlfriend, even while they were together. And that was what kind of woke her up to escape, to want to go home. And then unfortunately, when she did decide to go home, the first news she had that was not that her mom was excited to see her come home for the first time in several years, but the fact that her mom has small cell lung cancer.
Yeah. Wow. The dialogue feels authentic. What does that main sensibility bring to the heart of the story?
So I guess what I'd say is like the small town's tight knit community has kind of enabled the corruption and burying of secrets in the past, right? And I do kind of critique how insularity fosters like complicity. Uh,
Mm,
despite the fact that sometimes secrets also provide a necessary glue for survival in these small towns. Like, the small towns don't want their dirty laundry aired, and because they know everybody. And I think the dialogue actually plays part of this into the complexity, because we see that many of the characters have like these simple anecdotes to explain the world in which they live in, but yet they know it's not always ideal or even just, but they still accept it because they've learned to talk around it with great ease. And I think that happens in small towns. I've had other places that I've lived growing up in relatively small towns. It's kind of what you learn. And even when I first moved with my family to Vegas, that was in the 1970s, like the mob was very prevalent, but that's not something you talked about, even though it was there every day. It's
right.
just one of those things. And also, I had some experience living up in northern Wisconsin in the Midwest. And the same kind of thing in those small towns, that there's some things that people kind of talk around and they kind of keep their secrets to themselves and don't ask a lot of questions. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of falls into place with that. I'm also very fortunate in that a long-term writer, maybe writing television commercials and radio commercials, dialogue is something that's extremely natural to me. I'm generally called out for the fact that my dialogue is very believable in how the characters interact with each other, what they talk about.
Well, I love that. That's such an important piece. I think that can make or break how you're going to connect with that character. What do you hope readers carry with them once they finish Born on Monday?
So this is always kind of a tricky part, and sometimes I get dinged for it, but it's just the way I write. So like many of my stories, I tend to layer like psychological depth and visceral action and this small town intrigue all together. And the storm helps accelerate this toward the climax, adding as a catalyst for these like hidden truths. But once those truths are laid bare, I like to remind people that life very rarely serves up a clean, simplistic conclusion.
Mm,
And more likely, what it does is it gives us something else. It gives us this moment to reflect on a morally complex resolution, something where we go, I did what I had to do, but was it the right thing? I'm not 100% sure. And I'd like to remind readers they might not find like this overall giant arc of communal hope at the end, but I think if they focus on the individuals, they'll find out that those who survive, they'll find that there's this individual healing and redemptive arcs that kind of carry them through to say, yeah, these people are going to be okay. And I kind of hope that's what they find, because some people are going to say, maybe his ending wasn't quite as clean as I had hoped, because justice maybe wasn't 100% served up the way they wanted it to be served. But I
mm.
think in keeping with the themes and the truth of the story, that's what makes it a little bit more compelling.
Right, right. And life is rarely wrapped up with a neat and tidy bow. So,
Never.
yeah. Now, I know Born on Monday is a recent release.
Yep.
So I know you're busy marketing and promoting that. Looking ahead, do you have plans for another book?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My next work in progress has already started. It can best be described as a speculative thriller. It's going to go a little bit crazier in that it'll blend some science and metaphysics and something akin to the supernatural. It's actually a continuation of one of my other short stories from 50 States called Dead Ends. And that one was one of the most called out stories from the anthology. And it involves this young couple who take this reckless turn off a state highway in Utah and find themselves in a nightmarish government biohazard. So that should be really fun to write. It'll definitely be straight up action thriller in some ways, but I'll definitely continue on with I love to add in these literary themes along the way. But at the same time, I don't want people to think I'm completely like leaving Born on Monday behind, because it's well established within what I call the 50 States universe. And Born on Monday directly intersects stories that take place in New Hampshire and Vermont, leaving us plenty of room to see some of the characters return in future novels. I'm especially hopeful that Andrea Kearney, the journalist, is going to return, because she'll fit right in with that. And as for Billy, I don't know. His eyes were set out west, but since my tapestry is the 50 states, he could pop up anywhere along the way.
Yeah. I love that you have this 50 states universe. It's an unending supply of stories.
This was my vision almost immediately after 50 states was completed. Is that, well, actually, even while I was working on it, is a lot of the stories inside, even though it's not directly shared on the front end, all the stories interact in weird, sometimes loose and sometimes very strong ways. And that's something to explore as I write other novels along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rich, did you have anything else you wanted to add today?
No, sure. Other than people can find me, several ways online. I have a bio site, bio.site/Richard R. Becker, or they can just go to like a brand new website that was just put up called byrichardrabecker.com. And I think they can find out, more about my other books that way. They can find out more about some of the signings that I have coming up. Like in, I think, 2 weeks, I'll be in Flagstaff for my first signing for Born on Monday. And then I'll be doing one also here in Las Vegas on the 22nd of November. So kind of my schedule.
Okay, nice, nice. Well, Rich, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was nice to get to talk with you finally, and it was a pleasure to learn more about you and your work.
Nice to meet and talk with you too, Sherry. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Richard Becker, author of Born on Monday. You can learn more about Richard and his work at byrichardrabecker.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.